Welcome to the Catch Some Soulshine podcast, and I'm your host, Renee Bova. I'm here to share drastic self-care measures that will help empower you to awaken brilliance after life's darkest moments. I've discovered countless measures that help heal and transform you so that you can live a joyful, empowered life without feeling trapped in the past, without clinging to the opinions of others, and without fear of vulnerability in a community setting. I'm so glad you're here. So grab a cup of coffee because it's time to catch some soulshine. Okay, welcome back. I am thrilled to have Dr. Constance Scharff here with me again today to revisit our discussion about the brain chemistry, addiction, and different modalities that we can use to heal. And we're also going to address some of the issues that are still present in our society and culture today that can lead a person down that traumatic pathway toward the addictive behaviors. So last session, we talked about, a bunch of stuff. But I want to kind of do a little bit deeper dive into the school system and the way
Sure.
we're so structured today. And one of the things that I can't wrap my head around is the fact that you talked a lot about music in our last episode and how that changes the brain chemistry and helps with those endorphins
Well,
and
it isn't just brain chemistry, it's also brain structure.
brain structure. Yeah, the
Mhm.
plasticity of the brain
Yes.
and
Yes.
pathways and all that.
Yes. Yes.
But I really for me it's art is a huge pathway,
Mhm.
drawing.
Yep.
And it's the same concept. People say, "Oh, I'm not an artist." We're all artists, right? Just do it. But the thing that strikes me the most about all of this with the school systems is that we're fighting to keep those things in the schools. Okay?
We've
Gym.
lost them from most schools. No, no, no.
Yeah.
We're not fighting to keep them. They're gone.
Gym every other day. Uh Music, maybe
Once a
once a
week.
week. Art, we don't have time for art anymore. I
Well,
mean,
art's expensive, right?
yeah, all
So
the things that
I
we
live in a
know.
I live in a very small school, little small semi-rural school district, and they've got nothing left, and they're like, we have to cut another $2.5 million out of the budget. They're like, teachers are going. I'm like, what are you going to offer? Like, yes, I get I fully understand the economics. They're not wrong. If the money
Mhm,
isn't there, the money isn't there. But
right.
you can't have 100 kids in a classroom with one teacher. What, everybody's on some sort of online. I mean, I don't know what that looks like, but the system is, yeah, it's broken.
Yeah.
It's broken. And this idea that we don't need exercise, that we don't need the arts. I saw on the news the other day, very recently, that something, I can't remember if they said 75 or 77% of young people could not pass the physical standards to go into the military. So if
Mhm.
we had to have a draft for any reason, which I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I'm not suggesting that that's coming, but if we had to, there's nobody to call up.
Mhm.
They can't pass the physical test. You
Right.
can't send, a bunch of kids who, have never run in their life into a war zone. They will die. That is cannon fodder. That is the definition of that. And I thought about in the 1950s and 60s, and I'm told even into the early 70s, the physical fitness level of young people and the activities we didn't have in the, so by the time I'm born in 1972, so by the time 1980, for example, we didn't have that big old rope that you're supposed to climb. Everybody climbed the rope. In my mom's generation.
I climbed the rope.
Okay, we didn't have any rope. I mean, we were farm kids, so it was a little we had exercise at home just because you
Yeah.
had enough chores, right? We all bucked hay in the summer and whatnot. But I mean, the school system that we have now with the bells and the classes that are a certain amount of time, right? That is designed for people to take factory jobs. Show up at 8:15, woo, whistle blows. Start to work on this activity for 45 minutes, boop, whistle blows. Go to work on the next activity for 45 minutes, boop, whistle blows, 15-minute break, recess. That's training people to go to factory work. Education is meant to train people in critical thinking skills
Yeah.
and basic skills. Penmanship. People are like, well, everybody has a phone or a computer or whatever. You don't need to have penmanship anymore. And I'm like, okay. So no one who doesn't learn how to read and write in cursive will be able to read the founding documents of our nation, which are all in really curly, fancy script.
Hmm.
All of it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, it's already been transcribed into, okay. Oh, Rosetta Stone, right? Like if you can't read it, you can't read it. The people who have the skills have the power. And if we don't teach people how to think, I heard it was earlier in the week that big old ship hit the bridge in Baltimore.
Right.
And I heard this morning on the news that Baltimore media did not immediately cover the story. Now it happened at like 1:30 in the morning, right? So they had a minute or two to, figure it out because they had to confirm that it wasn't a deep fake. That the video that came in, the media had to confirm that it wasn't a deep fake. That's what we're living in,
Right.
right? I mean, when I
Right.
woke up, right now, of course, they're 3 hours. I'm in Washington State. They're 3 hours ahead of me, right? But by the time I woke up, I mean, that's all anyone was talking about.
Yeah.
We have a population that does not take civics anymore. One of the things that I learned growing up was how to understand propaganda, how to determine, and we don't teach that anymore. Now we teach social studies
Mm-hmm.
where we've got, tons of people who are high school graduates that can't tell you that France is a country in Europe, right? So we have to look at the fundamentals of the education system and question what's there, because the public education system is not catering to mental health. I can't imagine. My family's they're all educators. My brother's an educator, my aunts were educators, my mother was an educator. They're all educators.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot imagine school shooter drills with kindergartners.
I know. I know.
So if we're allowing that, which we allow, we made a decision at Sandy Hook as a nation. If killing kindergartners was not enough to make us change our policies, that's why it's, full on. I said to my friends, I said, I kind of want to go to Israel. And they're like, you can't go to Israel. There's a war. It's so dangerous. I said, I'm far more likely to get shot here. And I don't think that's untrue.
Right.
I don't know that there's been a statistical, assessment of that, but I do
Mm-hmm.
think it's safer to be in Tel Aviv. My odds of getting shot, I think, are probably less in Tel Aviv than they are uh, at my grocery store or my post office.
Sad. Going
So,
back to the elementary school,
yeah.
when you were talking about that, I was thinking when I was a kid, we walked to school and walked home every
Hmm.
day. Maybe
Hmm.
stopped at a friend's house, maybe didn't.
Hmm.
Never my mom never worried about where we were. We played outside until dark. We rode our bikes everywhere for miles
Sure. Yeah.
with our
Yeah.
friends,
Right. Well, I
and
mean, it's a different
it's a
time, but
different
here's
world.
but here's the problem. Because I'm talking about the substance of the education that kids are
Yeah,
receiving.
yeah,
And the problem is that the brain grows in a certain way. So I worked a lot um, when I was writing the book Rock to Recovery. There were a lot of kids getting music, therapeutic music programs who were adolescents, lots of them. Because and that's really important because the brain is going through a pruning process. That's why when you're young, super easy to learn another language, and when you're older, it's not,
Mhm.
because the brain grows in a certain way and it develops by the way that you think. See, here's something we know about addiction. The problem is not the drug. Problem's not the drug. Because if the problem was the drug, the alcohol, the behavior that if you're a sex addict, gambling, whatever, the behavior that you're in, if the problem was that, let's just say alcohol. When we remove the alcohol from your system, detox,
Mhm.
you should get better.
Right.
See, if you get bitten by a snake, you get a venomous snake, and we give you the anti-venom, what happens? You immediately get better. The problem was the venom.
Right.
The problem is not the alcohol. How do we know this? We know this because every single person who goes into treatment, when we remove detox, the substance from them, the behavior from them, they get worse
Right.
emotionally, physically, they get worse. They become very fragile. Why? Because there's an underlying issue going on, and that's what needs treatment. We don't address that.
Right.
So I loved it when we had adolescence because we can help the brain develop in healthier ways. When you take, in a broader sense, when you take music and PE and art and all the creativity out of school, the brain doesn't get to develop in its fullest way. So, what's the number one predictor of any number of social ills? Addiction, lack of performance, whatever. It's poverty. Because kids don't have access to the resources that they need, literally biologically. Literally biologically. There's something called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. There's lots and
Yes.
lots of research on ACEs, right? And the more ACEs you have, the less likely you are to flourish in your life.
Mhm.
And the more likely you are to have physical and psychological issues, right? And ACEs are broad because traumatic experience is broad,
Right.
right? Like, again, I understand budgets, I truly do,
Yeah.
but I don't understand how feeding children isn't a priority. Because if
Mhm.
you have kids who are hungry, and I get, oh, it's the parents' responsibility, and you're supposed to get breakfast before you go to school and all the things. But if you have a school district like where I am, where the average income is really pretty low, how's a kid supposed to learn if they're hungry? They literally cannot.
And if they do feed them junk.
Whole other issue. Oh yeah, whole
I
other issue.
mean,
Well, it's shocking to me when you look at the you know, school lunches that are provided in other countries. It's really something. But
yes.
bringing it back to addiction, I was in Ljubljana, Slovenia. I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, something like that, for a conference. I had met I'd been in Brazil, in Rio, presenting at a conference, and then I was presenting at a different conference in Slovenia. But I had met some people in Rio from Slovenia, and they said, "Why don't you come to our addiction treatment facility and talk to the people who are there?" So, yes, of course, I would love to. So I went. First of all, almost everybody there spoke English. Now, you don't think about that, but that's
Right.
because In other places, other languages are taught. Okay, that's just part of their education system. But we had a translator. There was a woman who really impressed me, and she was sitting up front, and she said, "How long do people stay in treatment?" I said, "Well, the treatment facility I work at, which at the time didn't take insurance, so it was all cash." So I said, "They stay 90 to 120 days." I said, "But that is unusual." I said, "Because insurance at that time was keeping people about 17 to 19 days in residential. That has dropped. Now you're lucky to get a week before you are stepped down to outpatient. And then you have to, quote unquote, fail out of outpatient, which very often means relapse. And with fentanyl, that means dead, which is
Yeah.
great for the insurance company because they don't have to pay for anything anymore."
Hmm.
Yes, I am cynical about that.
Me
Um,
too.
but so can you imagine if for your cancer treatment, they said, "We're going to give you uh 1 week, maybe two of whatever radiation or chemotherapy. And then you just have to go out and, let's say you have lung cancer, and not smoke anymore. And if your lung cancer gets worse, we'll take you back and you can have another week or two in treatment." We wouldn't do that.
Right.
We wouldn't allow that. And that's because we have a for-profit system. So when I said to this woman, I said, they stay, I said, "How long do you stay?" And she looked at me like I was insane. And she said, "Until the doctors and I agree that I'm well enough to make it
Mhm.
outside,"
Yeah.
which is one of the premises in that we talk about in ending addiction for good. We've known for about 50 years now, 50, not 15, 50, that people need structured, not all residential treatment, but structured care for about a year,
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes two,
Right.
right? We call it wraparound services, right? Residential treatment, ideally, is generally 90 to 120 days. When we had people who stayed 90 to 120 days in treatment, our recovery rate at 1 year, sorry, I have this itch on the side of my nose, been driving me crazy. Um, at 1 year was nearly 100%.
Hmm.
And at that time, we had what we called the Cliffside Malibu guarantee, that if you if you relapsed, we brought you back to treatment for free for another 30 days because we believed that we hadn't done our job.
Yeah.
If we had, if you had stayed until we said, "No, we feel secure that you're ready to go out on your own," and then you relapsed in that very, brief window after getting out, we clearly missed something. So we brought you back, but we worked off a different principle than most addiction treatment facilities. Our principle was that there are plenty of people out there with an addiction problem that we don't need repeat business.
Yeah.
Most facilities, certainly not all, but most facilities work off the principle of when you relapse, come back here and we'll take care of you. That you have a chronic illness that must be managed, and every time you relapse, just come back here and we'll take you back in. So then you only need, a few hundred or a few thousand uh, clients,
Hmm.
and your doors are your place is always full. But nobody ever really gets better. Nobody ever gets better. Whereas when you look at something like Alcoholics Anonymous, which I don't love, I don't think that's the be all end all. But how does the book start? We are men and women who have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body.
Hmm.
I have experienced complete recovery from addiction. I have not used in over 25 years.
Hmm.
I have recovered.
Right.
I look at it as remission. Could the
Mhm.
issue come back? Sure. But I also tend to doubt it
Mhm.
because at this point, I no longer see drinking, even cookies, right? Even sugar
Right.
as a solution. So a few months ago, my horse colicked, which is a severe issue in horses, and had to be put down. He died. And people started calling me like crazy. Are you okay? Do you feel like you're in a bad? And I was like, no, I'm not okay. I loved this horse and I really thought he was very elderly, but I really thought I had a few more years with him. It was,
Mhm.
he had never been sick. He'd had injuries, but he had never been sick. And then all of a sudden, 24 hours, he's dead. And I was like, but what would drinking do?
Right.
Like, I'd still feel awful. I'd get some numbness out of it for a short
Mhm.
period of time.
Yeah.
And then, oh, I mean, if you said, oh, if you get drunk, Cody won't die. If that was real and there was some sort of correlation, I would consider it. But that's not how it works. So I don't think about that. I don't think about it that way. Why would I pick up because Cody died? Because I'm sad. See, we've pathologized normal life experience.
Mhm.
An elderly friend of mine died. If her daughter went to therapy, which I would encourage, right? Because that's a loss, that's grief. It would be great to talk about that. You have to, if they take insurance, you have to have some sort of diagnostic code. There has to be a pathology. So if she went to the doctor, she could get absolutely prescribed antidepressants. She's not depressed.
Right.
She's grieving the recent, I mean, what'd she die? 4 weeks ago? She's grieving the loss of her parent, whom she adored.
Mhm.
But we don't have a mechanism for that because we have a for-profit system.
Right.
We don't have
Well,
a
I was
mechanism.
prescribed an antidepressant after Bradley died, and first my sleep, I just could not sleep at
Mhm.
all. So, I went in and I was given some kind of medication, trazodone or something like that to help me sleep. And I went back, "How you doing?" I go, okay." I mean, I don't really take that very often, but I'm still not sleeping the best, but I recognize that my life has been drastically altered. And I was offered an antidepressant, and I sat there and I'm like, "Oh, well, I don't know, maybe do I need it?" And I got the prescription filled, and I came home, and I thought about it, and I was like, "No. I mean, I have to feel this. I'm going to feel this." And I felt it for a long time. But for me, that was not a solution, a medication for my brain.
Right. And listen, there are people who have a biochemical issue and need those medications.
I agree 100%.
But
And
that's
I
not what we're talking about.
right.
We're talking
Mine was
about
grief.
people who have experienced an emotion. We
Mhm.
are not meant to be in a perpetual state of joy.
Right.
You can't have joy without sorrow.
Right.
They go together, right? You can't see how bright the light is if you don't have darkness to compare it to,
Mhm.
right? And most things are a shade of gray.
Well, and
Whenever I,
that's when I said I was talking to you earlier and I said, "I fully believe that I am here to be happy, joyous, and free." But that doesn't mean that I don't have days of darkness or periods or a memory that hits you and you feel that deep pain. But overall, I have the ability to bounce back from that now because of
sure.
the
So
things
so
I've
listen,
done.
so it's pathological, right? If someone's like ha 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 ha, ha, right?
Yeah.
That's pathological too. I mean, and
Yeah.
that's a genuine disorder. See, the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that has all of these, used to be quite thin,
Yeah.
a little bit more than a pamphlet, right? Small magazine. And that I think is appropriate. But now it's huge. I mean, it literally is telephone book
Right.
sized, and it's basically an insurance numbering tool because everything is a pathology. And if we had experience of feeling our feelings and we learned that. So in India, for example, children learn meditation and
Yes.
they do much better in schools in the US where meditation has replaced detention, especially with younger children, elementary grades. The outcomes are incredibly good where
Mhm.
kids learn, and it's better for brain structure. The brain grows in more positive ways,
Yeah.
right?
So I met this guy, the my company's boss, or
Mhm,
he the guy that owns the company that I work at.
mhm,
He has a cousin who is from India,
mhm,
and, I was telling him about my journey and the things that I and he goes, "Oh, my cousin has this program called The Art of Life, and it's a meditation program." He works with children and prisoners in Ohio. So I got to talk to this guy, and he explained how growing up in India, he had severe depression
mhm.
and he turned toward meditation, and it totally transformed his life.
Yeah, well, there's wonderful studies about very low income schools in the San Francisco Bay Area and other parts of Northern California, in New York City, in all sorts of places where they've done meditation programs. Um, there is wonderful research. See, when I left the treatment facility right before it was sold, because in my position in director of research is not recoupable to insurance, so that was one of the first positions to go. Um, I was looking at yoga, and most addiction treatment facilities, or many addiction treatment facilities, have yoga, and it's usually some 20 something bendy girl who comes in and does stuff that nobody else can do, and the women fall asleep and the men fart. At one treatment facility, they actually had to split the men and women in separate groups because the women are like, all they do is fart and think it's hysterical. Like, I can't stand it. So I went, and what we learned, because we do know that yoga is effective for addiction treatment, but what we learned is that it's the breath work
Right.
more than the poses. And there's all different sorts of breath work, some that comes from India, but I was reminded of Yogi Bhajan, who brought a particular form of meditation to the United States. And I think he came over in the 50s. Don't quote me on that, but I think it was the late 50s, maybe early 60s when he came over. And he, up till his death, had an addiction treatment program, and you can still buy the books. He had it out at their compound, out their facility out in New Mexico, and it's almost exclusively breath work. You can do the poses later. But when
Yeah.
you look at what yoga is before it was whitewashed, right? Because now it's, it's exercise at the gym, and it's been divorced from its theoretical and biopsychosocial, it's spiritual roots. But when you look at what yoga is, it is a system of health and of getting you connected and working out these things. So it isn't about the poses.
Mhm.
And if you had an Eastern practitioner teaching it in the addiction treatment facility, you would probably learn it isn't about the poses. But that research is by and large dismissed because it comes out of India. And even though many of the researchers are Western trained, They've come out of schools in Europe and the United States and Canada and Australia. Not only schools in India, although I'm not disparaging schools in India. Schools in India are quite good too. Even then, they're like, those are Indian journals. They don't have the weight that the Western journals have.
Hmm.
But it's very, very effective. These complementary therapies are very effective.
Yeah. All right. I hate to do this, but my son's calling me and I
It's all
have to
good.
get my granddaughter. So, I want to have you back on the podcast because I think we have a lot more to talk about.
I would love to be
Um,
back.
yeah, and I thank you so much for all the knowledge that you're bringing to, people that are listening. Please check out her website, her books. I will have them both linked in the description of the podcast.
And it's all constancescharff.com. So everything is there, links to the books, links to my research institute, the Institute for Complementary and Indigenous Mental Health Research. It's all there at constancescharff.com.
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Thanks for joining me on the Catch Some Soulshine podcast. I also want to encourage you to please rate, like, and share this podcast. Leave a comment that helps the algorithm. And if you are interested, I do have a free 11 powerful affirmation journal that features some of my artwork, and that will be in the comments as well, soulshine-sparkle.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next week.